Good day, everyone. I'm Christian Rex DAGONDON, and I'm going to discuss Gothic art. When I say Gothic art, I don't mean these people above. I mean this structure below. This is the Notre Dame of Paris, which is emblematic of Gothic art. Gothic art. So, what exactly is Gothic art? This art period dates from the 12th and 13th century. The word Gothic was originally or was once used as a pejorative by Renaissance historians because they think that this the art style that originated from this time period was barbaric and boorish compared to uh, Greek art and the Greco-Roman tradition. So many Renaissance historians believe that Gothic art is barbaric because of the Goths. The Goths are an ethno-linguistic tribe from the north of Rome, which attacked and Rome in 410. So this is the fall of Rome in 410, in which many historians believe that signified the fall of the classical world or the Greco-Roman tradition. Renaissance historians hold the Greco-Roman tradition in high regard, so that is why they think that Gothic styles are barbaric. Gothic art first emerged in France in the early 12th century with the construction of the Basilica of Saint-Denis built by Abbot Suger. And architecture was the most prominent art form during this time period, and as I will show you later in this presentation. The characteristics of structures from this area were significantly different from from the past structures such as the Romanesque. And not only did they add aesthetic appeal to the buildings, but they also addressed structural problems that the Masons faced during the construction of these structures. So there are four features that is emblematic of Gothic architecture. The first feature is the ribbed vault. It consists of two stone ribs that intersect to support a vaulted ceiling, which significantly reduced the weight that the supports will have to bear from the ceiling. In tandem with this feature are pointed arches that they directed weight downwards to the ground rather than to the walls, making more stable structures. When compared to Romanesque architecture, Gothic architecture employed these structural solutions and added aesthetic appeal to them. Because of these additions to these churches that were built during this time, uh, the walls weren't as thick as they were during the Romanesque period because the supports in the form of the ribbed vault and pointed arch no longer meant that mm, architects and masons will use thicker walls as they did during the Romanesque period. This is an example of the ribbed vaults and the pointed arches as shown in a picture of the interior of the Église Saint-Séverin, which was constructed in 1230. As you can see, these are ribbed vaults, and the arches are pointed. So it distributed the overlying forces to these supports so that the walls wouldn't have to bear much pressure. So they could build thinner walls and have more and give more attention to adding aesthetic appeal and effects to the interior and exterior of the structure. Flying buttresses are also another feature that served a structural purpose. It redistributed weight from heavier and higher floors of the structure and by providing lateral stability. And oftentimes, these features are ornately carved and uh, sculpted. Besides these structural features, one popular feature from Gothic architecture are large stained glass windows. These were prominent features introducing more natural light to the structure, which is which alludes to the light of God, because many of these structures are of religious nature or function. The most iconic stained glass art form are rose windows, which are used by many uh, I- which are used by many architects in building and designing churches, Gothic churches. So this is an example of the flying buttress as shown in Notre Dame. They distributed the forces here, from here to here. And this is a rose window from the same church. As you can see, not only is it artistically sophisticated, but also mathematically accurate, I could say. Gothic architecture can be divided into three phases, which are early, high, and late Gothic. On the other hand, French historians subdivide Gothic architecture into four phases, which are Gothique primitif, Gothique classique, Gothique rayonnant, and Gothique flamboyant, which means primitive Gothic, classic Gothic, shining Gothic, and flaming Gothic. These subdivisions may not have the same number, but they coincide with one another because the subdivisions of Gothic architecture, particularly the French, have uh, their own aesthetic additions to the earlier Gothic phases. So the first phase is the early Gothic phase. It started at around 1120 to 50 and ended at about 1200 AD. It first occurred in Ile-de-France in present-day Paris, and many art critics and historians say that the first truly Gothic structure or building is the Basilica of Saint-Denis that I have mentioned earlier. It was designed by Abbot Suger, and the construction for this building started in 1140. Uh, at the following years, other churches with the same aesthetic style uh, began construction as well. One of them is the Notre Dame of Paris, which began in 1163, and the Long Cathedral at 1165. In 1165. So this is the Basilica of Saint-Denis. So as you will see later, this design is much more minimalistic than the structures that were built later during Gothic history. These stained glass windows are not typical of early Gothic designs because these were introduced later in history. Early Gothic is different in France and England, not only because of their location, of course, but early Gothic churches had thicker, heavier walls that were not much changed from Romanesque proportions. It had accentuated and repeated moldings on the edges of interior arches and minimal use of tall, slender, pointed lancet windows compared to their French counterparts. They also used different building materials because uh, English churches made use of light-colored stone surrounded by a number of slimmer attached columns made of black Purbeck marble, while French structures made use of the local stones, which were mainly limestone. Uh, Early Gothic in England included structures like the Lincoln Cathedral and the Wells Cathedral, and the early Gothic style spread it into many countries in Western Europe. This is an example. An example of the English early Gothic style, which is in Lincoln Cathedral. So it has fewer windows than the French early Gothic styles. The next period is the High Gothic, which began with the subdivision of the French Gothic Rayonnant style, which spanned 1200 to 1280, and the English Decorated Gothic style. It is characterized by the usage of intricate geometrical designs with rich visual effects, and this was when stained glass windows became popular. Rose windows rose to prominence, and architects became more concerned with creating more visual effects than solving technical problems of achieving great height, which was the focus in the past period. So this is the south facade of the Notre Dame of Paris. So there is this large rose window and stained glass windows on the sides. And it also has structures like these pinnacles and uh, pinnacles reducing the demand for support. This is also the Cologne Cathedral that is a great example of the artistic sophistication during the High Gothic period. Finally, the Late Gothic. The Renaissance style became even more decorative in this period with the popularization of the flamboyant style in France. The exteriors of the building were much more covered with tracery and stained glass, and almost every part of the wall was sculpted. And greater attention was also given to secular buildings, contrary to the past periods which put focus mainly on religious buildings. So one example is the Chartres Cathedral. This is it had uh, ornate carvings on the walls, and this is the Notre Dame de l'Épine. As you can see, it has this procession stained glass design, and it has many pinnacles and ornate carvings. It eventually evolved into the Renaissance style later in history. So this is the Gothic sculpture in the portal of the Chartres Cathedral and in Notre Dame portal. This saint here is Saint Denis. He was martyred. His head was cut off. I wasn't supposed to be laughing. Anyway, this is the Basilica of the Saint Denis, its portal, and also the gargoyles. It is designed to convey water from the roof and away from the side of a building, thereby preventing it from running down masonry walls and deteriorating its quality. Gothic painting is also a prominent art form during this period. It has more relaxed figures than their medieval predecessors, and they usually featured scenes from the New Testament, particularly the Passion of Christ and the Virgin Mary. Besides religious subjects, they also portrayed secular matters, and many paintings are manuscript illuminations. One example is the Très Richeur de Duc de Berry. So this is a painting made by the prominent Limbourg brothers. So they made this a prayer book, decoration to the prayer book to be given to John, the Duke of Berry. And this is the Lady and the Unicorn, a painting that is exhibited at the National Museum of Middle Ages in Paris. These are examples of illuminated manuscripts. Finally, Gothic clothing. So peasants wore differently from the aristocrats. Peasant women wore white chemises and coats wrapped veils around their heads, while peasant men wore braids and chemises and possibly coats. They also wore hats. So these are the peasant men and women. They wore differently, they were humble, they had tunics, and they worked the field during this time of feudalism. For more aristocratic people, they had different articles of clothing. The surcoat is fitted through the torso with a moderately full skirt and is worn over a coat, and the shorter version is called a coat hardy. The houppelande was worn both by men and women, and it is a garment with a long body and flaring sleeves. So this is a woman wearing a surcoat, this woman on the right, and these people on the left are wearing a houppelande. It is long and had flaring sleeves. Women's clothing during this period was tighter and emphasized the natural curves of the body, and it had S silhouettes because the figure of S was the symbol of perfection during this time, and the definition of masculinity shifted from the fearless knight in shining armor to a more effeminate young man with curly hair and clean-shaven face, as will be shown in the next slide. The image of this woman follows the natural curves of her body, while these men had effeminate features, curly hair, and uh, a clean-shaven face. These are clothing that I have mentioned earlier, the houppelande and a coat. Summary, I won't have to read all of this. And these are my sources, and That is all, and thank you for listening.